Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room Update. We are on day number 124 of Israel's war with the terrorists in Gaza. It started back then on the 7th of October with the massacre of over 1,200 people and the kidnapping, taking hostage of over 240 people. Since then, the war has been raging on. The Israeli forces on the ground in Gaza have been conquering and destroying the Hamas infrastructure and the Hamas terrorists. We've overtaken most of the northern area of the Gaza Strip. We're expanding our activities into the central and southern areas of the Gaza Strip, now focusing more and more on Khan Yunis, one of these Gazan towns in the southern area of the Gaza Strip that really was the stronghold of Hamas. Khan Yunis is the hometown of Yahya Sinwar, the arch-terrorist who planned and really commanded the October 7 massacre. He was born and grew up in Khan Yunis. He was there known as the Butcher of Khan Yunis. That was his title, not given to him by the Israelis, but by the Gazans who lived in Khan Yunis and who live in Khan Yunis because of his propensity to kill Palestinians who he suspected of participating in any way positively with Israel. The IDF forces have been operating on the ground, above the ground, under the ground, constantly discovering more and more of the Hamas tunnels and the Hamas tunnel network that really did completely cover most of the Gaza Strip. It's something which has been the source of many different revelations on the last few days. Just in the last 24 hours, the IDF forces showing pictures of a massive tunnel over 1 kilometer long, which was linked to another tunnel, also 1 kilometer long, in which Israelis found the remnants of hostages, not the remnants, the signs of hostages who had been held in those tunnels, and a whole network of really a prison cell underneath the ground in which there was space to hold the hostages and space for the captors to rest and work. This appeared to be the executive office of the Hamas leadership underneath Khan Yunis, underneath the Gaza Strip, which obviously they had planned much in advance. What do these prisons mean? These underground prisons mean? They mean that Hamas knew exactly what their plan was for months, if not for years. And they had been preparing for that plan to infiltrate Israel and to take Israelis hostages. The subject of the hostages is something that we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth further in the program. And so we'll leave that for a moment. And just to say that, just to give some of the other updates from those Israeli activities in the Gaza Strip, also uncovering really substantial documentation of cash transfers directly from Iran to Hamas. We knew that Iranian Hamas connection existed. We saw that already in 2018, where Yahya Sinwar renewed the Hamas connections to the IGRC and to the mullahs in Tehran in order to really shore up and fortify his position both financially and ideologically, and to enjoy the support of Tehran for all the terrorist activities. That then brought in this really wave, tsunami of funding from Iran into Hamas and into the Gaza Strip, and that's something that the IDF forces have been uncovering. We also saw pictures of a room in Khan Yunis that was exposed by the IDF forces, where in one room, a UN vest, a UN employee, in the other room of the same house, munitions, machine guns, all living together in that really unique reality that was called the Gaza Strip, where there was no differentiation between the UN organizations and the Hamas terrorists. UN terrorists and Hamas terrorists, all unfortunately the same thing. In the north, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, another one of the Iranian proxies, has continued on with its war of attrition, continuing to attack Israel, and Israel continuing to respond. Just an hour ago, IDF forces attacked a number of sites in Lebanon, destroying more and more of that Hezbollah infrastructure. Unfortunately, in the south of Lebanon, the Hezbollah infrastructure, similar to Hamas's in the south, is very, very extensive. Hamas and Hezbollah made sure that they embedded themselves within the civilian populations, both in Gaza and in Lebanon. And so what we're seeing now is the using of those civilians as human shields, both by Hamas and by Hezbollah, something which is causing not a small amount of headaches. In the south, from the Houthis, we have nothing really new to report. In Judea and Samaria, there's been that continuation of the fight against the Hamas and other terrorists who not only exist and operate in the Gaza Strip, but also in Judea and Samaria, including Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, that's headed by Fatah, that's headed by Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called moderate that heads the Palestinian Authority. He's not a moderate. He's a terrorist in a suit that pays salaries to terrorists. That's something which no one can deny. That is Abbas's legacy. He is the father of the program, the massive program to reward terrorists for their terrorist activities. Now, I said before that we're going to discuss the subject of the hostages a little bit more in depth. And for that purpose, we're joined today by Advocate Nitsana Darshan-Leitner. She's the president, the founder and the president of Shurat HaDin. She's really one of those driving forces between making sure that the terrorists don't get away with what they've done free of charge, but ensuring that the terrorists pay financially for what they've done. Part of that idea, part of that basic premise is that terrorism can't function without funding. And if you attack its financial basis, that's how you can bring about bankrupting terrorism. That's how you can bring about the destruction of terrorism and operating all over the world. Sometimes I've had the honor of working with Nitsana on all types of different projects over the last 25 years, really, and to watch Nitsana take this field forward and turn it into an art form, how to bankrupt terrorists. But we're not going to discuss that today at length. What we're going to discuss today is really the idea of the hostages. As I said when we opened, on the initial attack in October 7, 2023, the Hamas and other terrorists took hostage over 240 people. Some of them were already released about 2.5 months ago, and some of them, 136 in number, remain in Gaza. Now, there is an international organization that is meant to facilitate, really, and is empowered to facilitate and ensure that hostages held by all types of people are visited by official sources who can ensure exactly what their physical state is, ensure that they are receiving the medicines that they require, and to ensure that the state or the entity that's holding them is fulfilling its requirement. That organization is called the International Committee of the Red Cross. For many, many years, I've been dealing with this organization already in my capacity in the army. And we've seen the International Red Cross really visit every single Palestinian who's been arrested by Israel for the last decades. The International Red Cross is so invested in this project of helping the Palestinians, terrorists who have been arrested by Israel, that it even knowingly facilitates the PA's Pay for Slay program. It's the Red Cross that signs the terrorists up on powers of attorney by which the terrorists designate where their money will go. This is an organization that for years and years and years has pretending to be a humanitarian organization. But now, when push comes to shove, when the Hamas is holding all of these hostages, the Red Cross has disappeared. Nitsana, really trying to hold the Red Cross responsible also for its failures, for its omissions, has submitted a lawsuit against the Red Cross. Nitsana, thank you for joining us. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the background of this suit against the Red Cross, what you think the Red Cross did wrong, is doing wrong, and how we can hold them responsible and ensure that they worry not only about the Palestinian terrorists, but also about the Israeli civilians who have been kidnapped and are being held hostage by Hamas and the other terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip.
Hi, Maurice. Thank you for having me. I'm here in Ashkelon after a visit to Kfar Aza and Netiva Asara, two kibbutz and moshav that were badly hurt in October 7th, hosting actually a mission from Kosovo, a woman that was a victim of the Kosovo War that was raped itself among the 20,000 other women that were raped in the Kosovo War. And she's the only one who speaks out about this. She's going all over the world. She's going in the UN, in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, and just speaks and talks about how sides to a dispute cannot use rape as a war crime. And if somebody does use rape as a war crime, should be indicted, should be brought to justice, should be even indicted for war crimes or crimes against humanity. So I apologize in advance for this location. I might be walking while we talk. And I thank you in advance for having me on your important podcast. Red Cross. Red Cross is an international organization that consistently just standing against Israel and against the Jews from the day of its inception. We know that the Red Cross refrained from going and visit the Jews that were held in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. They simply refused to go into Auschwitz and other camps for the idea that it's only an internal German problem. This is how they perceive Jews burning in the ovens in Auschwitz. Internal German problem. And for the entire time of the Holocaust, refused to go and visit the Jews there and to try anything they can in order to stop the massacre there. Today, they have an apology on their website saying that they made a mistake, that perhaps they should have gone and they should have visit and fulfill their job according to the Geneva Convention to see the prisoners from the other side. Throughout the entire years of Gilad Shalit, sitting in captivity by Hamas for 5 years, Red Cross did not go and visit it. Today, we have two citizens, Israeli citizens, that were kept for 10 years before October 7th. For 10 years, they are kept in Gaza. No one time the Red Cross saw them, visit them, and found out about their fate. And now we are in October 7th. So what expectations really we have from the Red Cross? Indeed, this is the only organization that has the authority to go and to visit prisoners and hostages in a war zone. That's its job. There is no other organization. The Geneva Convention obligated him to do this job, and parties to a conflict trust the Red Cross to do its job. But here in the Gaza war, the Red Cross refuses to do its job. We in Shurat HaDin approached the Red Cross right in the beginning, demanded they go and see the hostages. The Red Cross said that they are not working in Gaza. The Red Cross said that it's the Red Crescent that is in Gaza, not the Red Cross. And yet we saw press conferences and representatives of the Red Cross sitting in Gaza and mourning and crying for the fate of the poor Palestinians, what Israel is doing, destroying their houses, demolishing their facilities. There's going to be a humanitarian crisis. That's what the Red Cross knew to do in Gaza. And yet, no one visit with the Israeli hostages. So we sent them a warning letter signed by 1,500 lawyers, demanded that he comes and does his job, still refused. So we did what we usually do in Shurat HaDin, took the Red Cross to court. We filed a lawsuit in the District Court of Jerusalem against the Red Cross. The Red Cross has 60 days to respond. Rumors say that the Red Cross does not find an Israeli law firm to represent them, but the lawsuit demands two. One, compensations for the hostages and the families of the hostages that are suffering as a result of the breach of the Red Cross duty. And second, which is more important, is demanding the Red Cross to go and do its job. The court will issue an order to bring the Red Cross into the hostages, provide them with the medicine they need, and basically stop the torture and the rape and whatever they're going through, do his job. And you're right, Maurice, that it's not only against the Red Cross, it's against everyone that is responsible for the massacre, is responsible for the hostage situation, and can be found accountable. So your second part of the question is, what do you do about these parties? We can bring a lawsuit against them as well. And in Shurat HaDin, we're planning to sue whoever assisted Hamas before October 7th and still assisting it, which is Qatar, the Palestinian Authority, cryptocurrencies, Turkish banks, everybody that funded Hamas and assisting with his situation right now.
It's unbelievable to hear that the organization that constantly claims to be so neutral, so above all of these little conflicts that it sees between the people, has clearly taken sides already, as you said, on the first days of the war and Israel's response. The ICRC was already declaring Israel's response as excessive. As you said, they really did say nothing about the hostages for so very long, and whilst at the same time putting up messages about the destruction again in Gaza. How do the ICRC even explain to themselves that what they're doing is the fulfillment of their duty? Where do they think that they actually are actually fulfilling that obligation to remain neutral and to facilitate the access that they're meant to get to the hostages?
They claim from the press conferences that they are holding, we know that they claim that they did their job by asking to go and visit the hostages. And since they received the negative answer, this is where their job ends. Meaning they don't have a duty to pressure or to press or to demand. It's just asking, and if Hamas says no, that's where their job comes to an end. And unfortunately, this is not the case, at least not in our eyes. The Red Cross is not working in a vacuum. The Red Cross is an organization created by the United Nations, and it has to respond to the United Nations. And if he has a problem with any parties, he can approach the United Nations, as to put pressure on Hamas or on countries that support Hamas, on Egypt, on Qatar, on Iran, to let them go and visit the hostages. They can go to the PA and demand that they will grant them permission to visit the hostages because Gaza is part of the PA. It's not working in a vacuum. They have parties, they have sides, they have countries that can press, and this is their job. And if they don't do this, they fail to do their job.
So what's amazing, when you go over, for example, the Twitter feed of the International Red Cross in this area, you see that use of double language almost, and really pejorative language, you have to say. On the one hand, they say they're so proud of the fact that they facilitated, apropos what you said before, that they have no presence in the Gaza Strip, but suddenly they facilitated the release of Israeli hostages. But then at the same time, they say that they facilitated the release of Palestinian detainees. Now, when you consider those two things together, on the one hand, you have innocent civilians who were taken from their beds at gunpoint to the tunnels in Gaza. And on the other hand, you have terrorists who were arrested, who were tried, who were convicted of terrorist activity. But the ICRC is incapable of saying, well, we released hostages and we released terrorists. For the ICRC, even that terminology is problematic. We facilitated the release of detainees, as if they were innocent people just being held by Israel. This is really adopting the Hamas terminology that the terrorists being held by Israel are really innocent people, just so innocently taken off or maliciously taken off the street for no reason. Even that duplicity is really indicative of really the deep rot that seems to have set in the ICRC. How do they even explain that shameful terminology?
Maurice, I am afraid they don't have to explain. I'm afraid that all the international organizations siding with Hamas from day one, and they need no explanation because nobody in the world demands an explanation. Take a look at the UN. The UN did not condemn the massacre until a very late stage. The general, how do you call it? The head of the UN, I don't remember.
The Secretary General, Guterres.
Yeah. When did the first time he condemned the massacre? Only days after it happened. But don't worry about the UN. Take the UN Women Organization. They, despite the rapes and the sexual assaults during the massacre, and the horrible rapes and sexual assaults the hostages are going through now, UN Women did not say a word, only until a month ago, 3 months after the massacre. And for 3 months that the hostages are being kept in captivity, being raped on a daily basis. Take UNRWA. UNRWA, the organization that's supposed to be neutralized and to support to help the refugees and to calm down the situation from both sides, constantly doing things against Israel, and in this war found as a Hamas front organization by sending his own employees to take part in the massacre, by hosting and hiding missiles and rockets in his facilities, by allowing Hamas to build underground tunnels underneath their facilities. This is UNRWA. And just let's not forget that UNRWA is an international UN organization. So what really your expectation from the Red Cross? Why should the Red Cross be different than the other organizations? They don't need to be accountable because nobody demands an accountability. Nobody comes to them and said, did you lost your mind? How come you don't do anything in favor of the hostages by Hamas? How come you don't do your job? And you know what? Even Israel doesn't come to them and say, if you don't visit our hostages, we will not let you visit the detainees that really kept in prison in Israel. Where is the equality here? So, and you know what? And unfortunately, even when it comes to UNRWA, I don't see Israel demanding to shut down UNRWA. So I guess the answer to your question is, if the world sees Israel and Israel does not really put its step down when it comes to this biased behavior on behalf of the international organizations, the world will keep silent. And if the world keeps silent, the Red Cross, neither any of the international organizations have to explain anything to anybody.
And that it's truly amazing that you have this organization that really does give this semblance of of authenticity, of legitimacy, that claims to be a neutral actor all over the world. And really what you're describing is something which is really a very partisan organization that similar to UNRWA has been entirely infiltrated by the terrorists and taken over by the terrorists. Is that your understanding of what's going on in the Red Cross?
I agree. You can call it anti-Semitism. I don't care. This is the situation. I could not describe it differently.
I mean, it's unbelievable because we really have seen the infiltration of Hamas into all of these different organizations, as you mentioned before, systematically getting into every single organization that operated in the Gaza Strip. Really, that's the nature of a dictatorship. They dictate who exactly will be in what position. And that's what Hamas is. Hamas is a terrorist organization by its nature. And they forced this, willingly forced upon all of these organizations, really that reality where Hamas employees, Hamas terrorists are part of these organizations. Now, within UNRWA, we saw, for example, the identification by Israel of 13 different UNRWA employees who were directly involved in infiltrating Israel and participating in the massacre, and on the one hand, and receiving the hostages on the other. Do you think that we're going to see something similar also from the International Red Cross, Nitsana? Do you believe that there is that level of penetration all the way through? I mean, I was reading through some of the responses of the Red Cross in preparation for our briefing today, and you see on their website all types of things of saying, well, we operate all over. We've been operating in the Gaza Strip, which really does entirely contradict what they seem to have answered you in your previous correspondence with them. And they say, well, we've been there, we've been dealing with, so they clearly know who the actors on the ground are. They clearly know that there's something to lose. Are they unwilling or unable to really make good on their promises? Do they have no leverage against Hamas?
I don't believe so. I believe that they're simply unwilling to help the Israelis. As I described before, it's not a new behavior from their first day. They were against Jews and then against Israelis, and there is no willingness for their side to help the Israelis in no way. And it's not really that the Hamas infiltrated into the Red Cross, because as opposed to UNRWA, which you can say it was taken over by Hamas, 6,000 of UNRWA workers are Hamas people, and 12,000 of them are affiliated with Hamas or support Hamas. And we know that after the
1,200.
1,200, and we know that after the massacre, the entire UNRWA personnel praised the massacre and supported it. You can see it on their social media, etc. So you can say that UNRWA is really Hamas because it has so many employees that are affiliated with Hamas. The Red Cross doesn't have so many workers. And a lot of the workers are not Gaza people, are European that come and work in Gaza. So I can't really say, or I'm not sure that they were penetrated by Hamas, but they were penetrated by Israel hatred throughout the years. The Red Cross feels no obligation towards a Jewish state. And where the Red Cross fulfills a crucial duty in other war conflicts, we know that they were helping to take down, to release, I'm sorry, they were helping to release the girls that were abducted by Boko Haram. The Red Cross were intervening in Colombia, in Afghanistan, where there were hostages and people were kidnapped. In Israel, in Gaza, they just refused. So, and very bluntly, look, when the families of the hostages met with the head of the Red Cross, she told them that she is not willing to take the medicine that they demanded to the hostages. She said no. She said, I'm not going to do it. When officials of Israel met with her and asked to deliver the medicine to the hostages, she said no. And it was even part of the prisoner release deal, the hostages release deal, I'm sorry, that the Red Cross will take the medicine, and they refuse. So, listen, I'm not going to justify, I'm not going to try to find reasons why they're acting like this. It's simply anti-Semitism, and this is why we're suing them in court, because in court, anti-Semitism is not a defense.
What's unbelievable, Nitsana, is that whilst the ICRC does seem to be reluctant to help in any way, shape or form for to secure the release of the hostages, they are integrally part of that pay for slay program. I mentioned this before, and it's come up in the questions from our audience. So let me just give a brief overview of that. Maybe this can even be a help for you in the lawsuit.
Sure.
What I discovered already a few years ago, whilst working in my previous position in Palestinian Media Watch, is that the PA Pay for Slay program runs on the basis of the terrorists appointing a power of attorney, someone who will be the recipient of their money from the Palestinian Authority, because obviously they're in prison. They have to say, well, I, Ahmed, am in prison. I'm going to appoint my friend Mustafa to receive my money. Now, how do they do that? They're met by members of the Red Cross in the prisons. That's something that Israel has agreed to many, many years ago. In the course of that meeting, and so it says even in the PA regulations, in the course of that meeting, the Red Cross member will present the terrorist, the arrested person, with a power of attorney, and he signs them up on that power of attorney. Now, that power of attorney, he then appoints the person who will receive his money and on his behalf. And that's how this whole system works. Now, what I discovered at the time was not only that the Red Cross is integrally involved in this whole system, but, and more importantly than that, is that this whole process is not a service that the Red Cross is even meant to provide. It's something which within even within the Fourth Geneva Convention, there is a distinction about the functions of the Red Cross. The Red Cross is meant to provide services to administrative detainees, but is not meant to provide services to terrorists who have been arrested, indicted, prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to prison sentences. And yet they do that anyway. The Red Cross, as part of my correspondence at the time, and maybe you can approach Palestinian Media Watch and ask Itamar Marcos for some help on this. There, in the process of that correspondence, Red Cross officials even admitted that that service was something that they were providing on a voluntary basis over and above their basic requirements. Now, the subject of pay for slay is something which the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is also heavily invested in. Our board member and really visionary Sander Gerber was among the initiator, the driving force, really the bulldozer behind the Taylor Force Act in America, which stopped the U.S. aid or conditioned the U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority on the abolition of the entire abolition of the pay for slay program. And he was also the driving force behind the Kizuz law, the freeze law in Israel, which punishes the PA for its continued payments for for the terrorists. Maybe somehow that discovery that I made at PMW can also help in your other lawsuits against both the Red Cross and against the PA for the payment of salaries, because I know that's something that Nitsana, for our audience who doesn't know, was the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first organization to sue the PA for its active involvement in terrorism. Really a groundbreaking decision in the case of what's called Norwich, which was the subject of the two soldiers who were on reserve duty in 2000, took a wrong turn and ended up in a police station in Ramallah, and there they were lynched, butchered, murdered. It was Shurat HaDin and Nitsana that really paved that initial path to suing the PA for all of its involvement in terrorism. Not only those families, but 26 other families, correct me if I'm wrong, Nitsana, who benefited from that decision against the PA for its involvement in terrorism, right? 26 families?
That's true.
And that recently, Nitsana was able to help the families also realize some of the damages that were ordered by the court, basing itself on monies that had been seized as part of the freeze law. So now we're seeing that movement there. What's going on with the PA and the lawsuits, Nitsana? Tell us a little bit about that, just as an example of why the ICRC really should be afraid of Shurat HaDin, that this isn't going away quietly.
Listen, everybody who Googles our name will find out that we $1 billion of dollars in judgment, and we collected hundreds of millions of dollars. The case that you mentioned, Maurice, is a case that we filed in 2000 on behalf of the Lynch family. The family of the soldiers were lynched in Ramallah in the beginning of the Intifada.
Yossi Abrahami and Vadim Nordish.
Exactly. And later on, we filed more lawsuits on behalf of other terror victims. And all these cases were litigated in the District Court of Jerusalem. And in the end, after 20 years of litigation, yes, it took a long time, the court gave us a judgment for 130 million shekels. And this is part one. In part two, he will grant a similar amount. We'll wind up with 250 million shekels in total. And the PA refused to pay this money. So the way to collect such cases, such judgments, is to go and put a lien on the tax money that Israel collects for the Palestinian Authority, because this is Palestinian money, just due to a special mechanism is collected by the state of Israel, but it's given to the hands of the Palestinian Authority in the end of each month. And we put a lien on this money. The Treasury was supposed to accept the lien and to pay us the money, because by law, the Treasury in Israel can do an offset from this money towards any debt that the Palestinian Authority owes. For instance, if the Palestinian Authority owes an electric bill, Israel can deduct it from the tax money. If they owe money to Hadassah Hospital, Israel can deduct it from the tax money. Here you have a judgment that the Palestinian Authority litigated for 20 years and lost. And now the Treasury was requested to deduct this debt from the tax money. But in the previous government, the Minister of Finance, Avigdor Lieberman, and the Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, refused. I guess we're afraid for the viability of the Palestinian Authority, that they wanted to go bankrupt. We had a long argument with this previous government. Actually, I met Benny Gantz one day on a flight to New York, and I told him that we have to solve this problem, because in the end, 130 million shekels will not collapse the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority had 20 years to litigate this case. They had a chance to go against this money, and they lost, and it's a final judgment. And by law, they have an obligation to deduct it from the tax money. They have to pay the victims. And 130 million shekels will not collapse the Palestinian Authority. We are willing even to do it over payments. But finally, and I think this is what's the most important issue, when the Palestinian Authority, as you mentioned, Maurice, gives $300 million to the prisoners, to the terrorists who are sitting in the Israeli jail, which is close to 1 billion, more than 1 billion shekels, 130 million shekels is certainly an amount that they have to pay. All my arguments did not convince Benny Gantz to give us the money. Fortunately, there was a new government that came in, and the first thing that Bezalel Smotrich, the new Minister of Finance, did was paying the money to the terror victims. So yes, so every time the Palestinian Authority owes money, there is a way to deduct it. And the Red Cross, if it will be found accountable and will lose the case and will have to pay money, there are ways for Shurat HaDin to go after its assets and to enforce the judgment and to make the Red Cross pay the money.
And so now we're also just on further, a little bit further on the subject of pay for slave for a second. We're also now involved in legislation in Israel's parliament, in the Knesset, also together with Shurat HaDin, also on board together with the idea of another law initiated by Sander Gerber, which really says that instead of the punitive damages that the courts have ordered until now, we're going to enlarge that sum a tremendous amount. We're going to set a minimum, and above that, we'll obviously be able to collect much more, hopefully, and make the PA pay. And it's based on that very, very simple premise. If the PA has $350 million a year to pay to terrorists, it can certainly pay the victims of terror, and it should pay the victims of terror, even enlarged punitive damages, because the idea of paying a salary to someone simply because they murdered Jews should be something that's wiped off the face of the earth. It is a moral stain on the PA, and it is a moral stain on anybody who really supports them and helps them. Now, just to finish on that subject, that's the end of that. Now, going back to the Red Cross, Nitsana, what do you hope to get from the lawsuit, and what do you think the way is to go forward with it?
Well, we asked for compensations. The lawsuit was filed for 10 million shekels, which I think is even petty money to compensate hostages that are now, thriving, need the medicine, need the visits of the Red Cross, need to stop the tortures and the rape. They are in hell, and the Red Cross has the power to stop it, and they refuse. So 10 million shekels is the amount of the compensations required, and a relief, an order against the Red Cross to go right now and visit the hostages and provide them with the medicine they need. We're going to have a hearing. The Red Cross has to file its defense, and once it's filed in defense, we're going to go to trial to see what the Red Cross, to his defense, did in order to fulfill its obligation. I'm sure it won't be enough. It won't be anything to satisfy the court's discretion to, and they will issue us the requested relief.
That's amazing. We can only hope that the Red Cross will not only be forced to pay financially for its blatant really breach of its duties, but also will be forced to actually do what it's meant to do. And that's really the goal of the lawsuit. It's not really there to take the money away from the Red Cross, although that's something that needs to be done as well. It's there to ensure that the Red Cross understands that there are consequences, that it has a job to fulfill, and it's expected to fulfill that position and that mission. And if it doesn't, there's someone to hold them accountable. Nitsana, you were worried that you wouldn't be able to stay with us for long enough, but we've already made it, unfortunately, as this program often does, to the end of our time before we've ended the subject. Really amazing to have had you with us. Thank you very much for taking the time from the mission, and thank you, really, and good luck on the lawsuit against the Red Cross and against the Palestinian Authority and the other terrorists. Make them pay for what they've done. I think is really quite a noble mission in life, and so thank you for that. Also on behalf of the victims. To our audience, I have to say thank you again for joining us. We will be back with you again tomorrow at 4 o'clock Israel time. For those of you who want to pass on the message, you can join our daily Zoom, clicking on our website, jcpa.org. There you can click either on the Zoom link or on our YouTube channel. You're invited also to subscribe there. And then you can get the context and the analysis that we provide on a daily basis since the start of the war. There is also, for those of you who can, a donation button. Just remember that the JCPA functions entirely and solely on the basis of donations. And so if you would like to press there, we recently added a function of donations via credit card. So it really is quite easy for those of you that can do it. Thank you for joining us. We will, as I said, see you again tomorrow. Nitsana, thank you. And regards to Ashkelon and to the whole mission there. And thank you very much for